cosmological argument is a family of arguments in natural theology that aim to prove the existence of God by appealing to universal features of the cosmos, such as its existence, its beginning, its change, or its contingency. Unlike a priori arguments that rely solely on reason and definitions, the cosmological argument is fundamentally an a posteriori argument, drawing its premises from observations and empirical facts about the world around us. At its core, it is driven by the fundamental human question of why there is something rather than nothing, seeking an ultimate explanation for the existence of the universe and everything within it. Historically, different formulations of the cosmological argument have been proposed, with some of the most influential coming from figures like Thomas Aquinas and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and more recently, the Kalam cosmological argument has gained prominence. Despite their variations, these arguments generally follow a pattern that moves from an observed characteristic of the universe to the necessity of a transcendent cause or ground for that characteristic. One of the earliest and most classic formulations comes from Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica. Aquinas offered several ways to demonstrate God's existence, the first three of which are considered cosmological arguments. His first way is the argument from motion. He observes that things in the world are in motion or undergoing change. Anything that is in motion must have been put into motion by something else, as nothing can move itself. This leads to a chain of movers. Aquinas argues that this chain cannot go on infinitely, as there would then be no first mover to initiate the motion in the first place. Therefore, he concludes, there must be an unmoved mover, which is itself not moved by anything else, and this unmoved mover is understood to be God. Aquinas' second way is the argument from efficient causation. We observe in the world a series of efficient causes, where one thing causes another. Just as with motion, Aquinas argues that nothing can be the efficient cause of itself, and that there cannot be an infinite regress of efficient causes. If there were an infinite chain of causes without a first cause, there would be no subsequent effects. Since we clearly observe effects, there must be a first efficient cause, which is uncaused by anything else. This first cause is identified with God. The third way, the argument from contingency, is perhaps the most widely discussed of Aquinas' cosmological arguments. It begins with the observation that things in the world are contingent. They are capable of existing, but also capable of not existing. Their existence is not necessary. They depend on something else for their being. If everything were contingent, then at some point, there could have been nothing, because anything capable of not existing might, at some time, not exist. If there was a time when nothing existed, then nothing could have come into existence, as something cannot come from nothing. But clearly, things do exist now. Therefore, the argument concludes, there must be something whose existence is not contingent, but necessary. A necessary being that exists independently of anything else, and upon which all contingent beings depend for their existence. This necessary being is identified as God. Another significant formulation is the Leibnizian cosmological argument, which is based on the principle of sufficient reason. This principle states that every truth has an explanation, or for every being, there is a sufficient reason for its existence, either in itself or in another. Applied to the universe, Leibniz argues that the universe as a whole is a contingent fact. It exists, but it is conceivable that it might not have existed. According to the principle of sufficient reason, there must be a sufficient reason for the existence of the universe. This reason cannot be found within the universe itself, because if every part of the universe is contingent and dependent on something else, the totality of those parts, the universe, cannot contain within itself the reason for its own existence. Therefore, the sufficient reason for the universe's existence must lie outside the universe, in a being whose reason for existence is in itself a necessary being. This necessary being is identified with God. The Kalam cosmological argument, popularized by contemporary philosophers, has roots in medieval Islamic theology. Its most common formulation is a syllogism. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. The argument then proceeds to analyze the nature of this cause. Premise 1 is often defended by appealing to intuition and the inability of something to come from absolute nothingness. Premise 2 is supported by both philosophical arguments against the possibility of an actual infinite past, such as Hilbert's hotel thought experiment. The argument then proceeds to analyze the nature of this cause. Premise 1 is often defended by appealing to intuition and the inability of something to come from absolute nothingness. Premise 2 is supported by both philosophical arguments against the possibility of an actual infinite past, such as Hilbert's hotel thought experiment, and scientific evidence from cosmology, particularly the Big Bang theory, which suggests a finite age for the universe. If the universe began to exist, and everything that begins to exist has a cause, then the universe must have a cause. This cause must be transcendent, existing outside of space and time, as it caused space and time, the universe, to come into being. Furthermore, this cause must be incredibly powerful to bring the entire universe into existence. Defenders of the Kalam argument often argue that the best explanation for such a cause is a personal, intelligent being, God. Common to all these forms of the cosmological argument is the move from some observed feature of the universe, motion, causation, contingency, its beginning, to the need for an ultimate explanation or ground for that feature that transcends the universe itself. The being identified as this ultimate explanation is typically ascribed attributes traditionally associated with God, such as being uncaused, necessary, eternal, and supremely powerful. However, the cosmological argument is not without its critics, and numerous objections have been raised throughout its history. One significant objection, famously articulated by Bertrand Russell, is to question why the universe itself cannot be the uncaused or necessary being. Why must the chain of explanation terminate in a being outside the universe? Critics argue that if everything needs a cause or explanation, then God would also require one, leading to an infinite regress problem for the theist. Proponents respond that the argument concludes to a being whose nature is to be uncaused or necessary, thus not requiring an external cause for its existence in the same way contingent things do. Another objection challenges the principle that everything must have a cause or sufficient reason. Perhaps the universe simply exists, and there is no further explanation required. This is often referred to as accepting the universe as a brute fact. Regarding the Kalam argument specifically, some critics question the philosophical arguments against an actual infinite, and others point to interpretations of quantum mechanics, where events at the subatomic level may appear to happen without a discernible cause, potentially undermining the first premise. However, defenders of the Kalam argument argue that quantum indeterminacy at the subatomic level does not apply to the universe as a whole, and that the relevant sense of causation in the argument is different from the probabilistic nature of quantum events. Furthermore, even if the arguments successfully demonstrate the existence of an uncaused cause, necessary being, or transcendent cause, critics argue that identifying this entity with the God of classical theism, a personal, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good being, involves a leap of faith or additional argumentation. The cosmological argument on its own might only prove the existence of a deistic first cause, not necessarily the God of religious doctrine. In conclusion, the cosmological argument, in its various forms, remains a compelling and enduring argument for the existence of God. By starting from observable features of the universe and reasoning to the necessity of a transcendent ground or cause, it attempts to provide a rational basis for belief in God. While facing significant philosophical and scientific challenges, the argument continues to be debated and refined, prompting deep reflection on the nature of existence, causation, necessity, and the ultimate explanation for reality. It speaks to a fundamental human desire to understand not just how the universe works, but why it exists at all.